Hi, and welcome to the Campfire Impact and Innovation YouTube live stream. I'm your host, Kerm Zaman, the CEO of Fifth Tribe, and today we have our special guest, Mike Ravenscroft, who is a program officer at the PeaceTech Accelerator based out of the U.S. Institute for Peace. And Mike specializes in helping startups that are focusing on social impact and helping them to get funding. And he also does that through a program called C5 Accelerate. So on behalf of Fifth Tribe, I'd like to welcome you to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Kerm. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome, thank you. So my first question, Mike, is to tell us a little bit about yourself. You had a very interesting journey, and you've been part of the DC startup scene, and you ended up, working at a few different institutions that are pivotal to the startup ecosystem here. So could you just talk a little bit about how you ended up in the space that you're at?
Yeah, sure. Backwards. That's the short answer. I did a lot of pivoting on my career to getting to the point where I'm working with startups. So I started in consulting. I started working at the advisory board company just across the way in Washington, D.C. And I was doing management consulting for institutions of higher education. I went back to grad school, got my master's in literature. Kids at home, you can make it with a humanities degree. I thought I wanted to be an academic, but I decided that what I really enjoyed doing was consulting. And what I enjoyed about consulting was helping people solve problems. Like at the end of the day, like that was kind of what got me up in the morning, was like figuring out how I was going to help a client figure out a solution to a problem. Anyway, so went to work for the Center for Innovative Technology, which is a nonprofit. It's state appropriated funds, and we invested in technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship in Virginia. So
where's that based in?
So it's based out of Herndon. So my job when I started was doing consulting projects to inject innovation into the Virginia ecosystem. That meant doing a lot of work with state governments, did a lot of data system implementations, did a lot of work trying to figure out how state departments of education, workforce could be more innovative, could leverage data in new and interesting ways. And I backed into working with startups through an accelerator program that CIT helped launch for the Department of Homeland Security, the Science and Technology Directorate. And DHS came to us with a very specific challenge, and that was that there was, as they saw it, not enough innovation in the technology base for first responders. So for the police and firefighters that are out there on the streets risking their lives every day, they have, and EMTs, I should add, they have a challenge, and that is that they don't have the most up-to-date tech, and they don't have tech that is in any way affordable or usable, because there are like 4 vendors in the space. They've been around for about 120 years, some of them literally 120 years. And there's not a whole lot of incentive to innovate when you have sort of an oligopoly. So what we did was we started a program that was an accelerator for the federal government, the first accelerator for the federal government. We didn't take equity. It was purely to get stakeholders connected with startups. So getting startups working with police, fire, EMTs, and helping them figure out what the customer problems were that they were solving. It's a really hard customer base to sell to. And so DHS thought if we can connect these two constituencies that very rarely talk to each other, so startups and venture capital, and then first responders and the federal government that's maybe a buyer of some of that technology, maybe we could inject some innovation into the space. So it's a big challenge. It's a big market, but it's very tight. It's very hard to compete as a startup. But so that was what we did. We worked with a cohort of 10 startups, and I sort of figured out what it was like to work with startups and work with entrepreneurs who are, sort of taking a big risk on an idea that may or may not pay off, and develop some very key relationships doing that with some of the entrepreneurs and venture capitalists that we worked with, VCs that we worked with. So following from that, I helped CIT launch an accelerator called Smart City Works, which is still operational and moved outside of CIT, and it's now in a co-working space called Refraction in Reston. And that was an accelerator program for early stage tech startups that are developing tech for the built environment, so smart infrastructure primarily. And then from there, I joined the team at MACH37. So MACH37, for those of you that are not familiar, is an early stage cybersecurity accelerator. It was founded about 4.5 years ago. And I joined for the most recent cohort. And the idea was invest in innovative startups that are developing potentially disruptive technologies for cybersecurity applications. It's an amazing program. I had a blast. I ran the most recent cohort along with the team there. And then was just recently asked by C5 Capital to join their team to run the PeaceTech Accelerator, which is an early stage accelerator for technology startups that are looking to leverage their technology to mitigate the drivers of violent conflict around the world.
That's
We're an impact accelerator, and we're very early stage. And I can sort of explain a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, so that's an incredible journey that you've been through. And so you've been sort of in the Northern Virginia startup scene, and PeaceTech is based out of Washington, D.C., out of the United States Institute for Peace. And their focus, you mentioned this term, peace technology. Like, what is peace tech, and how do you contrast that with these other accelerators that you ran? Like, one was oriented towards cybersecurity, one was about smarter cities, one was about first responders, and now you're in this space. And this is a global focus or is it a national focus?
It's a global focus. And actually this current cohort that we have, we're a cohort model. So we do 3 cohorts a year. It's 6 to 10 startups in a group that we recruit to join the accelerator. This cohort is our most geographically diverse. So we've got 4 companies from Africa, 2 from Accra, 2 from Lagos. We've got 1 company from Pakistan, from London, and then 1 from North Carolina, 1 from DC. So kind of from all over. So to get back to for the first part of your question, so relative to what we're doing, so Peace Tech as a term, actually, let me start a few steps back. When accelerators first launched with sort of Techstars Y Combinator back in like 2000, 2001, there was sort of this idea that you could bring innovators together and that there would be strength in the community, the cohort that you put together, that they would be able to innovate among each other and, through providing them with some entrepreneurship, coaching, business development training, go-to-market strategy, marketing, sales, et cetera, that you could help them build successful businesses. And that model, I think, has been relatively successful in helping startups get from sort of, starting at 0.1 to, 0.500 when they raise their round. Now, the challenge for us and for, I think, most accelerator programs, they are operating as entities that are investing, so looking to turn a profit, to generate profit for our investors. The challenge is it's tough to work in across as many verticals as you might be if you're recruiting 10 startups from, e-commerce, cybersecurity, fintech. So what a lot of accelerators are doing now is sort of finding niches. And so to contrast what I'm doing now with Smart City Works and MACH37, and then the Emerge Accelerator for DHS, those were all very niche specific in the sense that it was either a specific kind of technology base that we were investing in, a specific market. So with DHS, it was first responders, and with MACH37, it was a specific technology vertical with a very specific use case. So actually, I think it's a good model because it helps you focus sort of the efforts of the team. It helps you bring in a mentor network that is targeted and can provide some real valuable feedback, whether that's in the market, the customer base, challenges raising venture capital if you're in that vertical, et cetera. So Peace Tech is a little bit of a different beast. So we're investing in companies from all over the world that are impact focused. And Peace Tech as a concept is relatively new. So Peace Tech was coined by the Peace Tech Lab, which is one of our founding partners on the accelerator, along with AWS and C5 Capital. So Peace Tech, the Peace Tech Lab is a spin out of the U.S. Institute of Peace. And the mission of Peace Tech Lab is to promote peace building initiatives internationally through the power of technology. Their slogan is putting the right tools in the right hands to promote peace. And so their hypothesis is that you can use technology for the power of good. At its most basic level, and at a more complicated level, like how do you mitigate the drivers of violent conflict? So whether that's sectarian violence, gender violence, civil unrest, lack of government transparency, corruption. What are the drivers that lead to unstable states and unstable regions, and how can you invest in technology to mitigate that? The accelerator takes it a step further, and the accelerator's hypothesis that suggests to us, or the hypothesis is that there are enough innovative startups around the world that are innovating for the power of good, so innovating to actually mitigate drivers of violent conflict. How can we find those startups? How can we invest in them? And how can we deliver a return that is double bottom line, so that is impact focused and investor driven?
That's amazing.
That's the hypothesis.
So can you give some examples of some of the challenges that Peace Tech startups are trying to address? I know there was being a mentor, I've seen some of the cohorts that have come out. I remember there was one about dealing with refugees. One is about, sort of like climate change. So what are some of the challenges that Peace Tech startups are trying to address?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, a couple of direct examples. So, one of the companies that actually recently was featured on CNN is called Hollis Systems, and they provide advanced signals and warnings to populations that are at risk of missile strikes. So,
Wow.
right now they're providing a lot of data to various governments in Syria. So, bombings that are occurring in the region. And so they are entirely focused on mitigating violent conflict.
So they're
directly.
saving lives through their technology.
Literally, yeah. And so that's sort of the most sort of direct application of that. And then so the other company you mentioned, Takadam. So they are an AI data set training company that leverages the workforce in beginning in Lebanon of displaced populations. So people who are refugees who are looking to make some cash but don't really have any source of stable or sustainable income. One of the biggest problems that AI companies have right now is they spend most of their time training or developing data sets for the purpose of training AI and not actually developing AI itself. So the holdup in AI, I'm sure you know this, right? The holdup is that there's not enough data that you can use to train, a computer to see a stop sign as a stop sign. It takes hundreds of millions of data points, and
So to break this down, what we're talking about for Taqaddum is that if you want to do anything AI related, any sort of machine learning, you need huge data sets. And there's a market that's been created to clean up that data. And what Taqaddum is doing is they're using the workforce basically of refugees and displaced people who are looking for employment opportunities. And I think one thing I learned was that there are restrictions in terms of refugee employment in their host countries.
Right.
So a lot of refugees that are living in these camps, one of the conditions that the host countries are, put on the United Nations and other institutions is that they won't compete with the local workforce. So what can refugees do in terms of, earning income and supporting their families in a place that is disconnected from they're displaced and their economic systems are also disconnected from the company. And what Taqaddum does is it hires refugees to basically tag the data. So if there's image notation, all that stuff, and then any company that's doing artificial intelligence will basically buy that data, I guess. Is that their business model?
Effectively. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. And so, and those are just a couple of examples.
So that's really you're killing multiple birds with one stone. You're helping hire refugees, giving them jobs, and you're accelerating the development of artificial intelligence into the economy. And that's an incredible business model.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that strikes me is pretty inspirational. I mean, I don't want to sound, cheesy at all, but I mean, it really is inspiring to see somebody trying to solve both a social and a business problem, because it's literally twice as hard as doing one or the other. And those two companies that I alluded to are a great example of the direct sort of application of Peace Tech as we see it, in the private sector. I mean, these are companies that are trying to leverage public, private, not-for-profit entities, resources. But at the end of the day, they're building venturable companies.
And why do this through startups as opposed to nonprofits or governments? And I'm not trying to say that nonprofits and governments are not good enough, but there's something special about the startup model that addresses these problems in a very unique way. So can you talk a little bit about startups specifically? And USIP is a semi-government institution, right? Yeah.
It's a nonpartisan government agency. Yeah. So why startups? I mean, it's a good question. When I first learned about Peace Tech, I was pretty skeptical because, to be honest, these are massive social, societal level problems. I mean, how does anybody solve that as a startup? And one of the challenges that startups have generally is that they try to do too much, that they are unfocused. They have too wide of an aperture, and they don't have the kind of discipline that they need to solve a specific customer problem. So when I think about these intractable, potentially, multi-nationwide social problems that have been going on for generations, how do you solve that? I mean, governments struggle to solve that. The reason why is I think startups have the unique ability to innovate in a way that governments and nonprofits tend to struggle at. And part of that is due, I think, and this is just what I've seen in working with these entrepreneurs, but part of that I think is due to the fact that entrepreneurs think very differently. They are much more laser focused generally because they don't have huge budgets. They don't have multi-year procurement cycles that they can sort of survive through. They have to move quickly and they have to be nimble. And often that's where the innovation happens. You running a startup, you understand this. I mean, you're constantly trying to figure out your product market fit and you're constantly pivoting. And that I think is both the curse of a startup, but it's also really where the innovation happens. It's where the opportunity is. Now, I would never say that we could do this or that startups could do this in a vacuum. I think that personally, I think government and nonprofits play a critical role in this.
Yeah.
One of the organizations we do a lot of work with is USAID. They have a $100 million innovation program where they're like putting direct, not investments because they're a government agency, but basically innovation challenges, prizes. They are rewarding innovation that's happening sort of on the ground level, and the government's an integral part of that. Same thing for nonprofits. A lot of the nonprofits that we work with, FHI is a really good example of this. FHI 360.
Yeah.
They actually just launched a venture fund, but they work with startups and they try to work with startups to get them traction. They try to get them proof points by giving them connections to people that are working in the country. And to my mind, you can't have one without the other. The innovation that comes out of startups is often directly linked to innovation that comes out of government, or will in some way feed back into government. Same thing for the nonprofit sector, and then for more established companies that are already operating in the region.
Yeah, I think you've touched on something that's incredibly important, is this concept of an ecosystem. And it's not just the technology, it's not just the startups, it's not just the VCs, there's a government role, there's a nonprofit role. There's a really good book that I was reading that talked about how basically like almost every major technological invention that happened in America was tied to an initial government program.
So the entrepreneurial state?
Yeah, the entrepreneurial state. It's great.
Book,
the author is, I think it's Maria, I forgot her last name.
I think it's Matsukato.
Yeah, Matsukato. So
it's a great book.
It's a great book, and she talks about things like the GPS, which, she talks about the internet. She talks about, all these things that we take for granted now that, if you look at, for example, what goes into a smartphone today in the 1980s was like $850,000 worth of equipment. And so you have like your GPS on it, you have the internet on it, you have Wikipedia or whatever, and you have your contacts, like the phone book's in it. And so just like, it's all this really expensive technology that was basically subsidized in one form or the other by the US government and made it cheaper for other companies to innovate. And even Silicon Valley, which we look at as a model of innovation globally, a lot of the companies that came out of there came out because of defense contracts that happened in World War II.
Or small business innovation research grants, or any other number of government funding vehicles, or university funded research. Absolutely.
Exactly. So Peace Tech is trying to basically attract companies that are really trying to deal with, conflict zones. You mentioned like Syria, where there's airstrikes that are happening against civilian populations. You mentioned refugees in Lebanon. There was also like climate change. There's a lot of different types of areas that you guys are focusing on. So what are some of like the core, like 5 or 6?
Yeah, so we have 7 core innovation themes that we developed that help us sort of chart, what our North Star is as far as the kinds of companies and the kind of tech that we want to be investing in. And I'm not going to rattle them all off, but if you think about the drivers of violent conflict, so lack of transparency in government, being able to manage scarce resources, gender violence, cybersecurity, moving forward. These are all things that we see as, if we can find entrepreneurs that are developing innovative tech around those problem statements, and they've found problems on the micro level that they can solve for, that helps with the bigger picture. So this is one of the things that makes this program, I think, really interesting, is that we get to work with across verticals, so fintech, ag tech, clean tech. What unites the entrepreneurs is their sort of impact focus and how they feel like they fit into the broader mission of Peace Tech. So another company that we're working with in this cohort right now, actually, so there's 2 I want to point out. So one is called Muster, and they are a peer-to-peer shared housing marketplace for Africa. And they want to do, so this is, they're basically trying to do for the African housing economy what Airbnb did for like luxury housing rentals. And what they see as an opportunity there is related directly to the fact that if you're young and living in Nigeria, it's very hard to afford to live. It's extremely expensive to live in Lagos. It's a high growth city, just like any other major urban area, and cost of living is high. And there's no way to find rooms that are like for young people, for millennials. There's just no way to connect and form communities. And this is something that they're trying to solve for. And on its face, it's hard to see what sort of how that contributes to world peace. But when you talk to the team and you hear about sort of what their story is, Nigeria has a lot of violent conflict. Like a lot of the drivers of violent conflict are poverty and a lack of accessibility to affordable housing. And built into their mission is a goal of basically ending homelessness in Nigeria, and then more broadly Africa, and more broadly the world. And to my mind, it's investing in the entrepreneur that has that impact vision, whether or not it fits neatly into a category that we can carve out, but knowing that they feel like they fit under a broader umbrella. That's what I think makes this a unique program. What's so interesting about the startups that we work with. The other one that we're working with right now is a company called Fori, and they are basically a LinkedIn for blue collar workers, and they're operating in Pakistan.
Cool.
And they are basically trying to formalize the informal labor market there, and it's all about economic empowerment. And you can't have civil unrest without, or civil unrest is directly fueled by economic disempowerment and disenfranchisement. So we put it on the entrepreneurs. I have a pretty good sense of what I think could help drive peace internationally, based on what I know about it, and then also what our partners can bring to the table. So PeaceTech Lab specifically, but to the entrepreneurs, it's their pitch. I mean, they're pitching us their impact as much as anything else.
That's excellent. That's excellent. So let's talk a little bit about this program. So how long does the program run? So how do people hear about the program? Like, how do they get it? Like, does the State Department or USIP promoting it for you guys? Is it word of mouth? Because I know somebody who actually got into the program personally.
Yeah.
And I forgot. I think I heard about Peace Tech because there was an event like down the street in Crystal City, and that's where we met Dimitra.
Oh, nice.
And it was like great. And then I was like, wow, this is. And we were just totally just in shock. Like, this is an amazing organization that's right in our backyard. So one is, how do people hear about Peace Tech Accelerator? And then two, how does the program work? Like, how long is it? What sort of programming do they go through? What happens at the end?
Yeah, so it's an 8-week program. We run 3 cohorts a year, and it's 6 to 10 companies per cohort. Like I said, we look internationally, so we partner with a lot of incubators, both regionally, nationally, and then internationally, to drive interest in the program. And really what we offer is access to capital, access to the cloud. One of the things I neglected to mention was the majority of the companies that we're working with are on the cloud already, and all of them are actively looking to move to the cloud. Because in terms of being scalable internationally, that's sort of one of the goals, is building sustainable, scalable companies. And
your partner is Amazon Web Services.
Amazon Web Services is one of our partners.
How much, if you don't mind me asking, what type of support does AWS give them? Is it credits?
So they're a partner. They're one of 4 partners. So between C5 Capital or C5 Accelerate, Amazon Web Services, SAP NS2, which is the National Security Directorate of SAP, the global software company, an independent entity operating in the US, and PeaceTech Lab. All 4 partners contribute support for the accelerator, mentorship, technical resources, and then access to a network. One of the biggest challenges I think that entrepreneurs the world over have is trouble. Basically, I mean, credibility is really the word I use often. It's hard to get credibility as a startup because you think and know that your idea is the greatest thing in the world. But other than a small group of friends and family, unless you've built a $150 million company before and exited, it's hard to get people to take you seriously.
Right.
So one of the things that helps with that is getting not just mentorship and sound advice on how to improve your business model, improve your investor pitch, but really access to a network that can then help you do some of the heavy lifting to build the business. One of the things that we teach our entrepreneurs pretty early on is this is not a race to get venture capital. I think that many times companies struggle with the idea that venture is like the end, when really it's a means.
Right.
And it's not necessarily even a means that you should have in your business if you don't want to be a venture invested company. I mean, there are a lot of strings that are attached to venture, but it is a way to scale your business. So there's a reason for it. But I myself, the other mentors in the program, my team, we coach our entrepreneurs on basically ironing out the business problem they're solving and really focusing on what the business model is.
Which can be very challenging, I imagine, to try to.
It's the challenge.
Try to have an impact and also make a profit. So how do you kind of? So what are some of the ways that you have the cohorts focus on their business model?
Well, so it's a pretty intense boot camp. So the way that we run it, the first 2 weeks are all about sort of breaking apart all the assumptions that you have and figuring out why you have them and testing them. So the challenge, and as an entrepreneur, you know this, I mean, one of the biggest challenges is I'm building a product, or I've built a product, but where is it going to be used? Who is my customer? How do I get my customer to actually use it? How much are they willing to pay for it? The sort of details around that. I mean, building the product.
And entrepreneurs hate doing that.
Yeah, right. It's hard.
They hate talking to customers. They love building apps. They want to get the logo and the website and do marketing, and they don't want to talk to the customer.
And I get it because it's super hard.
Which is, to be honest, like one of the first, when I was coming in as a mentor, one of the first things I was talking about was like customer interviews, and you were like, "Yeah, we need to get these guys to do customer interviews," and I was like, "Oh, Mike gets it," because what happens at some of these programs is that they kind of like lock them into a room and they're just like coding all day and they're building something and they're not even testing it out in the market to see if there is an actual need for it. They're building kind of like a bridge to nowhere.
Right.
And so it's important to have that level of confidence and focus, but not to the point where you sort of drink your own Kool-Aid and are not interacting with the market, because every business, it's never going to be, it should never be like cut in stone where like the market changes, you need to adapt to it. And so getting in that habit early on, I think is very important. And one of the things you did was you had them do customer interviews. That's how I met Devless, was they just came by and just did a customer interview because they're like, "Hey, you guys are an agency. What do you think about, would you hire developers from Africa?" And I told them, yeah. I was like, I've had developers we've worked with from Europe. We've worked with developers from Asia. We've worked with designers from Latin America. And then I just said, yeah, this is basically what we're looking for. And I just started telling them what our problem was. And I was like, our issue is actually not the developers. We can find great developers. It's managing that process. And then it turned to a sales pitch basically. So it was great. So it was a great like customer interview in the sense that like, and I told him, I was like, hey, we have a project coming up and we'll try you out.
It's the hardest thing you can do as a startup for a couple of reasons.
Why do you think that is?
I mean, I've been trying to figure this out because so that company specifically, I mean, not to call them out because every company struggles with this, but one of the things we do in our program is we literally dedicate an entire week and a half to customer discovery. So we have nothing on the calendar. It's just customer discovery. And it's basically like a a quest to see who can get the most customer calls.
That's great.
So the goal is like 20 over that week and a half, which is a pretty aggressive goal. But I've had companies shoot the moon and go for like 40.
Do they get a prize if they get the most? Or?
They do get a prize. I'm not going to tell you what the prize is. You have to get in the program now.
That's great.
Prizes.
So you gamify the customer discovery process.
Yeah, because and it's healthy competition, I think.
But because entrepreneurs are competitive by nature, so gamifying is actually a great way to do that.
I think it makes, and it's worked out pretty well for us. But I mean, I think the reason why it's hard, for one thing, it's scary emailing somebody cold and saying, "I'd love 20 minutes of your time to just talk about what your problems are related to X part of your business." The hit rate is not great if you're just doing cold outreach. But then again, I mean, when you're doing sales, your hit rate's not great.
Yeah.
And customer discovery is a lot better than sales because it's, and my advice for any entrepreneurs who are hearing this is don't underestimate how much people will be willing to talk to you if you ask them, what is the hardest part about your job? Because really in customer discovery, you're trying to figure that out. It's like related to what my product is or what I think I'm going to help you solve. What is the hardest part about what you do? And there are things you have to learn from your customer discovery interviews that are not just whether or not they're a sale. It's whether or not they are representative of a part of the market that I should or shouldn't be going after. Mm-hmm. And that's the hard part. It's like separating the signal from the noise there. Mm-hmm. Because testing assumptions, you have to be able to record data. You have to be able to measure that against sort of trends that you're seeing.
Yeah.
And this is why when I read The Lean Startup years ago, and I reread it years ago, and then I reread it like last year because it is still such a relevant book. Mm-hmm. And that method, build, release, or build, measure, learn, and then repeat. Mm-hmm. Like measure is such a critical part of that. Like being able to measure whether or not what you're doing is working. I honestly think that's what separates successful startups from those that fail.
They're objective as much as possible.
Yeah, and it's hard to measure something that is maybe kind of squishy, like somebody's mm-hmm. opinion. It's easy to measure clicks on a website. Yeah. Like it's very easy to measure. Okay, this campaign worked because we got 100,000 clicks, and that resulted in X number of purchases. But then there's next level stuff, and when you're selling something that's not super intuitive, I mean. Mm-hmm. How do you know whether or not you're going to be able to appeal to refugees in Lebanon? Like whether you're going to be able to sell to that customer base or convince them to come. And how do you test that? Well, you go to that region and you do interviews. You
Right.
ask people. I mean, this is the thing that I think technology encourages us to get away from, is like human interaction. I mean, not to get all, you know, on my high horse. I feel like an old man when I talk about this. I'm only 32, but like, I feel like an old man when I talk about it. But like,
technology can't solve every problem.
No, and
Right.
I think it can encourage you to sort of get away from your customers. It can encourage you to use Slack channels and to sort of,
or
just
do surveys
code.
and stuff.
Yeah, do
And
surveys.
you lose the qualitative component of it. And sometimes what happens is when you do customer interviews, they actually give you the language that you use for your advertising, which is kind of what I was speaking about last time, was like, just do, customer segments. Like, you can probably come up with not just one or two. In the startup phase, you go up with 20, 30 customer segments, and talking to them and, solving people's problems if they sign up for your product, and you ask them, why do you sign up for it? That language becomes your ad. If you're using a search ad or you're using a display ad, or it segues so much easier into marketing versus like kind of groping in the dark,
Right.
and just like really trying to just like figure it out after you've built this thing out and you've built it the wrong way for the wrong customer. I think it's really challenging. If you told me to do customer interviews in DC, I got it down. Even in New York or LA.
Yeah.
But what's so challenging is that these companies are coming from all over the world to a country they may not have ever been to, and they're doing customer interviews with people like, I think that's just like amazing. Like, if you took me and put me like in Germany, like I would just stay in my hotel room. Like, I wouldn't be able to talk to people. I would just be so intimidated. You know what I mean? So that's phenomenal that you've been able to attract so much talent from so many different countries and to get them out and talk. And, I know like with the DevLess guys, I think they come over here and I was just really impressed talking to them. I was like, wow, these guys are really top notch. Yeah. And, then it made me think about our problem, a problem that we had this problem with sort of our DevOps, and we've been kind of talking about it here and there. Yeah. But then all of a sudden they have a solution and they're like, wait, this is great. Like, you know what I mean? So that's just like phenomenal. So let's shift a little bit from the program. We talked a little bit about the startups. Let's talk about money. Okay.
Happy to.
Because
I don't have any information.
So this is important because I think that, first of all, let's talk about some of the myths around money, because you mentioned something about, one of the things with startup programs is entrepreneurs want to make money. And, not all of them are driven by just pure financial incentives. And I don't think that works if you're purely 100% driven by financial incentives. But, they also need money to thrive. And you mentioned going to venture capital as an option, but it's not always the first option. And there's something else that you were kind of implying, that there's things that they should do, whether it's sales or something. So what is sort of the overall financial life cycle of a startup? So you have programs like, hackathons where you can win prizes. And then after you go into a hackathon, maybe they have sort of like an incubator where you can come up with an idea, then an accelerator, which helps you kind of develop the idea and scale it. And then, so what happens after that?
So, everybody has a different view on this. I mean, I think that there are a number of ways to build and scale a startup. And I think there are, different means you can use to get capital when it's scarce. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. The reality is that you need gas in the tank. You need money to be able to operate. So the other reality is that people are bootstrapping longer now. So venture capital is moving upstream because it's risk averse. Early stage investments are highly risky. So better to wait till the company's at a Series A when you're pretty confident that they're going to, generate some decent returns to put your money in.
So let's talk about some of these terms. So bootstrapping.
Sure.
So Fifth Tribe bootstrapping. So I know what bootstrapping is, and it's painful. Yeah. There's pros and cons of all these models, right? One model is like you can take external funding if it's an investment, but then you lose control of your company, and some people are not okay with that. Bootstrapping is basically like you're not taking any external funding. Whatever you get is through sales, and that's it. And that's great and terrible at the same time. So like,
when you've got a story behind this, so I'd love to hear it.
It's really like your sales cycle is. We have this saying like your pipeline is your lifeline, basically. And so you're just looking at your pipeline, and your pipeline is always in flux. And so these deals that like this happened to us last year, where we had around October, which is kind of when the sales cycle starts ramping up for the following year, and like. We had this pipeline, and like these are the deals that we think we're going to win. These are the deals that we think we're going to not, like 50% more likely we're going to win, 50% more likely we're not going to win. And it was hilarious. It's funny I'm saying it now, but at the time it was like really stressful. Was every deal that we thought we were going to, we lost. Then every deal that we thought we were going to lose, we won. And then we were like, all right, what did we do wrong here? And it's scary because like you were like, okay, did we get lucky, or was there something working here? And so bootstrapping, I could talk all day about bootstrapping. But you mentioned
Founders Capital.
You mentioned Founders. Yeah. So then there's Founders Capital. then you mentioned a Series A. And what is a series, and how many of them are there, and what is the difference between each one?
Yeah,
that's probably like an hour-long conversation right there, but we can do like a quick.
Yeah, I mean, so it's fairly straightforward in terms of the stages that you go through to get different degrees of financing and different points in the company life cycle. But I mean, it starts with founders capital, so bootstrapping basically. A lot of founders will sort of do consulting on the side if they're building a product company, or if they're building a product company forward, that they'll wrap around some consulting services just to basically pay the bills, or they'll just put in their own money. And then after that point, you have maybe a friends and family round where you convince some of your closest friends, maybe a rich uncle or an aunt, to put in $50K. And then at that point, you're basically ready to build your MVP and get it out the door. That's the point where a lot of the struggle that I see now is happening. So there are a couple of ways to move from friends and family to the next round. So one is accelerators and incubators. So getting connected to a network of venture capital or angels or other financing opportunities, alternative financing.
And what's the difference between an incubator and an accelerator?
Yeah, so incubator, I mean, this is changing given the way that WeWork is sort of taken over the space, but I mean, effectively, it's incubator is sort of idea stage. There's not really a set time limit on the commitment of the startup. So a startup might enter an incubator, be there for a couple of months. They might be there for a year. Really, it's sort of formation stage, bringing a team together and doing an initial product build. An accelerator is where you have an initial product built or very nearly there, and you're looking for market validation. So effectively, you're trying to get the product into the hands of people who can either test it or give you feedback on it. So this is where sort of the customer discovery question comes into play. And you're also working very closely with a network of mentors to get some really serious mentorship. And that's advice around go-to-market strategy. So really sort of figuring out what your product market fit is, how you get to your users, how you get to your customers, who buys it, how much they pay, et cetera, all the sort of legwork associated with that. That's effectively what an accelerator shortens the gap on. It's closing the gap to finding product market fit. I think that's the best description I've heard so far. And again, there are accelerators now that operate differently. There are accelerators like Dream It, which is sort of a later stage accelerator. That's after a company has done a round of financing and they want to do another round of financing. We're earlier stage. So when I say earlier stage, we are effectively at or post MVP and early traction or a little bit of traction.
So most of the companies have not got a Series A at all, right?
When they come into the accelerator, no, for the most part. So after that point, companies will do a Series Seed. So typically, and again, this depends by region, but in the Mid-Atlantic East Coast, for a Series Seed round, you're looking at individual angels or angel networks, possibly an early stage VC.
And what's the difference between an angel and a VC?
So an angel investor.
We're bringing this down for everybody.
Let's break it all the way down. So an angel investor. An angel investor is a wealthy individual who is putting money into.
So this is typically like a high net worth individual, not necessarily tied to a fund per se. It's just like a person.
That's right. Okay. That's right. And for everybody who's looking at angel funding, you want to make sure your angel investors are accredited. There's an accreditation you have to be an accredited angel investor.
You want that with the SEC?
I think so. I mean, it's basically like there's a certain calculation where it's like, a certain number, you have a certain amount of money over the value of your house or something.
Yeah, exactly. It's individual and joint. It's a couple of like $100,000. It's usually basically like anybody who's like a wealthy doctor, a lawyer, or anybody who has like disposable income. There's a certain financial threshold about that. Okay.
Right. And there are angels and then there are angels. So the angel, if I were starting a startup tomorrow and I were looking to be a high growth tech company, I would want somebody who has built, scaled, and exited a high growth tech company as my angel. There's validation implicit in that. Most of the angels that come on at an early stage will also be advisors in some form or fashion. Whether or not they're on your advisory board, they will be helping you build the company.
So it's not just getting somebody who writes a check, but somebody who actually has the company's best interests at heart and has some experience where they can help, not necessarily in the same business, but at least understand the market, the customers, and connect you with other people. So it's not just, hey, where's my ROI? They're not just sort of like nagging you about that. They're actually really they're actually serving as a mentor. That's interesting.
I would recommend it because, I mean, as a company at the early stages, you think the only thing you need is cash, but that is not accurate. You need help. You need more than just
you need that entire ecosystem.
Definitely. And to be honest, the angels that I've met and that I like to work with, they care about the companies they're investing in. They're not just writing checks and then, waiting for a return. They want to be involved. Mm-hmm. And if I were an entrepreneur, I'd want them involved. So if you're raising a pre-seed round or an early seed round, that would be that. It would be angels and angel networks. Now, you have to understand where you're raising venture in order to have a fighting shot of getting it, because angels in this region expect some kind of traction. Now, it did not used to be.
Can you talk a little about the regions real quick? I think it's important.
Yeah, sure.
Is that the VC game is different in different parts of the country. Like New York is not the same as LA. Right. DC is not the same as New York or LA. So just talk about that a little bit, because you've actually, I think, have an incredible amount of experience throughout the DMV, probably more so than most people. And you've been plugged into so many of the different, sort of startup ecosystems. So what do investors in this region look for?
Well, that's a good question. There are
I think you're the best person to ask, because you've got like the state, the federal, the global, like you work at all three levels. It's pretty awesome.
I appreciate you saying that. This is just one person's opinion. There's dozens of, you ask 10 people this and you get 25 different answers. But this region, so the Mid-Atlantic, sort of generally from like New Jersey to North Carolina, there's a lot of angel activity in this region. Like an impressive amount, actually, I think. Mm-hmm. It's still dwarfed by the Bay Area, but when you actually look at the number of people that are putting their own money into early stage tech companies, I think it's actually pretty impressive. The challenge
people sleep on DC. There's a lot of tech here. I think after the Bay Area, New York, it's like one of the largest sort of tech hubs in the country.
Absolutely, and if you factor in Virginia, Maryland, and DC into that, it's a region that competes with New York and Austin, I think. So the challenge, I think, historically has been that angels are individuals. It's hard to figure out who has money and who's going to put it into your company. I don't know about you. I don't know a whole lot of billionaires. I've met a couple, but I don't know anybody comfortably enough.
I don't have any billionaires on my phone Rolodex. I've met a few, but they didn't take my business card.
Yeah, it's hard, and people ask me this question all the time. They're like, "How do I find angel investors?" And I don't.
So I just see Adam in the back, like, you guys don't have billionaires in your social network? Like, he's looking down at us.
If you've got some, all ears.
Probably plays basketball with them on the weekend.
No, it's really hard to find them, and that's why the consolidation of angel networks has been really helpful. So Baltimore Angels, New Dominion Angels, even smaller angel networks like Tyson's Angels, operating out of Tyson's Corner, Dingman Angels, which is part of the University of Maryland. They're fantastic networks of people who understand technology companies and they want to put their money in. A lot of that is because there are a lot of entrepreneurs who have exited and who feel very favorably to the region and they want to invest in the region.
Like Steve Case is, I think, Revolution.
Yep. Yeah. He's put a ton of money into local companies, and even
Steve Case is the co-founder of AOL, and he basically has created a fund specifically to support, I guess, like the rest of America.
Yeah, the Rise of the Rest Fund.
The Rise of the Rest Fund. And so he's been focusing a lot, not just the DC area, but just anywhere outside of, I guess, the traditional sort of like VC circles. But
that's right. Yeah. And people do this because they love investing in startups. They love, the entrepreneurial mindset. And like for those who have been entrepreneurs and who have been doing this for a while, there's a real desire to do that. It's an incredibly risky asset class. You're not in any way guaranteed to even get your money back. I think it's like 19 out of 20 angel investments fail. The one that's successful makes you,
right,
$500 million. But it's hard to get that one. Anyway, so that's the seed round, and then now one of the things that's happening as far as the financing life cycle goes is companies are doing multiple seed rounds. So you could do a seed 1, seed 2. Seeds are getting bigger. So it used to be that a seed round would be sort of 300 to 700K in this region. Now I've seen seed rounds as high as like 1.5, 2 million.
That's amazing.
And at that point you're bringing in some serious coin. You have to have some serious traction. And this is, again, a piece of advice I give entrepreneurs that we work with, but venture follows traction. So customer validation is the thing that, if I were running a startup, that I would be looking for. Because the reality is people don't really invest in, pitch decks in a dream anymore. You have to have something to validate.
The market's maturing in a different way. Yeah.
It is. And I think that this is a little bit different on the West Coast. I've heard stories from entrepreneurs that work on the West Coast. So they literally had a pitch deck and two people that, knew how to build product. And they're like, okay, $500,000. And that just does not happen here. Like it really doesn't. And for anybody who's listening who thinks that, that it can happen, it won't happen to you. I'm just being honest.
Right.
Like it's hard. It's hard for us normal people to do this.
Yeah. And I think like for me, like one thing I'll see with some startups, I haven't seen it at PeaceTech, but other places is like, they'll be like, oh, this is our idea and we have this app, we're going to build it out. And there's like nobody technical on their team. And so for me, like my alarms just start going off right off the bat. And so that's something that I think it's very important that people understand is that if you're serious about getting a business started and you're serious about getting funding, you're going to have show not just an MVP, but also something that's actually being used in some sort of, as you mentioned something about traction. Yep. So what are some examples of traction that VCs are looking for?
So traction can mean customers. It can mean revenue. I mean, certainly those are the 2 points that people would mention right off the bat. But the thing I always tell startups is there are different ways to show traction. Traction basically means proof. It's proof that there's a there, that there's a market that's willing to buy what you're selling. And it's proof that you've figured out the fit. Now, I've seen companies raise $2.5 million pre-revenue because they had customer commitments. So they had customers, they had like the CMO of like Nike writing them a letter saying, I will buy this once it's built. And here's my letter of intent. And here's what the pilot would look like. I mean, that's as good as money.
So it doesn't have to be like a subscription or a purchase with money moving. It could even be like a sign up for a service, like a pre-release or like you mentioned a letter of intent. Right. Yeah. I mean, so it basically, customers at the end of the day, traction is customer validation. You can have partnerships, which is another way of sort of showing that you will be getting customer validation. Because if you're working with, say, if I've figured out how to partner with, say, Amazon Web Services, and I'm not generating revenue yet, but they're a partner of mine, and they're going to resell my solution. Well, there's probably a there because Amazon Web Services does not just do that. Right. Same thing for any large company or even smaller companies. They're willing to take a chance with a startup. The thing that I come back to is, you're trying to convince an investor that you're solving a problem that is so bad that people will be willing to pay money to fix it. And that's not trivial. That's not a non-substantial. That's not a trivial thing because people will put up with a lot of pain. I mean, this is the thing before they pay for it.
Yeah, I mean, like I think about the things that annoy me day to day, and then I think that there are apps or there are office solutions that can solve that. But like, I'm not going to pay for them because it's not annoying enough.
No, exactly.
So you really have to be solving like a hair on fire problem, and you have to be able to articulate that, and you have to be able to show that there's a reason why you think you're the one to do it, because chances are there are 150 other people that are trying to solve the problem as well. Like if it's that big of a problem, it's that worthy of being solved, then chances are you're not the only one.
So let's continue this line of conversation. So you mentioned in terms of the life cycle. So there's founders capital, there's a friends and family round, there's one or two seed rounds, and you're seeing it go all the way up. At the low end from $300K to up to $1 million in the DC area. What happens after that? So you mentioned a Series A. What is a Series?
Yeah, so a Series A is basically the first tranche of what you might call like institutional financing. So that's when you're bringing on some serious money. From venture capitalists, from venture capital funds. So you would be looking at, anywhere from 1.5 to maybe 6 or 7 million, depending, at the high end. And you're bringing in people who are going to help you rapidly grow the company. And it's not just the financing, but it's the network that you get connected with by being invested in by one of those VCs. It's an incredible amount of validation to be invested in by NEA or Columbia Capital or what have you. So that's the first in a series of financings that will then subsequently happen, maybe not. So not every company goes through to like a Series D financing. Not every company needs to or wants to. After Series A, you have Series B, Series C, Series D, potentially Series E. I can't remember. Did Uber just do their Series D or something?
Yeah, they're getting there.
Yeah. So,
Then after that, people either just usually IPO at that point, right?
Yeah, I mean, or get acquired. So for the most part, startups will get acquired. If they are successful in their exit, they will either be acquired outright or be acquired by private equity or acquired by a private company. And the reality is just IPOs are much rarer than they were. Most companies don't IPO anymore. And it really depends on your space. I mean, so the thing that I always like to go back to when I'm working with early stage entrepreneurs is I ask them what their vision is for the company. So, if your vision is, I want to build this till it's like, $300K in annual recurring revenue, and then I want to be fine with that, and I'll have like 5 employees, that's great. Do not raise venture capital. You will either be lying to the investors you're pitching because they'll be telling you, well, how are you going to get to subsequent capital?
Yeah.
They'll be saying like, well, here's how, but you don't really intend to. And unless you plan to leave the company at that point, I just wouldn't do it. I mean, there are a lot of expectations that come with venture, and the expectations.
You have fiduciary obligations as an owner of a company, as a CEO of a company, to your partners.
Yeah,
and you can't just take that money and abscond with it. It's not like Bitcoin. I'm just kidding. I'm
an Ethereum guy myself. No, I'm just kidding. So no, I mean, but you're right, and it's not just that you have fiduciary responsibilities. You have rights that you've given away. You're giving away potentially a seat on your board. You're starting a board. You're bringing on board.
It's like a marriage in some ways. Like it's a very serious relationship. There's a lot of accountability that goes into it, and you can't just take the money and run, basically.
No, not at all. And I mean the challenge really that I see a lot is a mismatch of expectations. Often VCs are extremely good at one thing, and that is figuring out what will not work. Like more than anything, I've sat in on like hundreds of pitches over my very brief career in venture capital, and the thing that I was like just floored by from the get-go was how good VCs who've been doing this for a while are at pointing out flaws, weaknesses, and then just why something won't work or what they think will make it.
So they're good at being critical.
Absolutely, and you understand why. I mean, it's like they have to be risk averse. It's an extremely risky space.
They're exposed to so many ideas on a constant basis. Like
right.
Like they're getting pitched constantly, and so they probably have a healthy dose of skepticism about that. But what don't they do well?
Don't they do well?
Because you were saying they do some things well, but there's some things that they don't do well.
Well, I mean, it's I mean,
or in terms of expectation management. Are we talking
about? Well, yeah.
Startups?
To close the point on expectation management, I think if you're pitching a fund that has an exit horizon of 5 years, as in they want to get their money back in 5 years, and they want to do that at like a 5x. So X is like they want a 5x multiple on whatever they put in. So if they put in 10K, they want to get 50K back. If you know that and you don't think the company's capable of that, or you don't want to grow at that rate, or you don't think that would be a good fit for the company, then they're probably not a good fit as an investor. Now, most companies would say, no, I want to grow that fast. I want to do this, I want to do that. But it's a real question that I think that people should take more seriously because, like you said, it's a marriage. I mean, you're bringing somebody into your company. It's, you're not only hiring it's not like you're hiring somebody, but you're giving somebody an actual financial stake in the company, and they're going to be on you.
That person is entitled to certain pieces of information, like whether it's financial data or whatever. I think people are really under a lot of like misconception about what's involved with bringing an investor into your company. It's not like they just write you a check and then forget about it. Like they can, on a quarterly basis, whenever they want, they can have access to the books.
Inspection rights is actually what it's called. It's basically I can show up at your office anytime.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have to present it, and you can't deny them, or else they have a legal claim.
Yeah. And I gotta say, I mean, I don't blame anybody for that. I mean, like that to me is just managing your money effectively.
Yeah, exactly.
And to be honest, if the expectations are there on both sides, then there's really no problem. I mean, I think that, like I said, I think venture capital is a really good way of dramatically accelerating the pace at which you're growing, the rate.
So if you're looking to scale your business, that's when you should really be thinking about VC.
Absolutely.
But if you're not entirely sure that you've got product market fit or you've really found your customer, at that point you're still looking at raising, either putting your own money in or friends and family, or going through like a seed round and really kind of like making sure you've really got the business down pat.
Well, so and to kind of get back to something we were talking about earlier, people forget that most, like you said, like most innovations come out of the government or out of some kind of government-financed innovation program. So a lot of some of the most successful startups I've ever worked with have come out of directly out of government-financed innovation programs. So DARPA, IARPA, projects related to DoD work.
Google came out of, I think, IncuTel, and which is it was like a CIA it's a nonprofit that's like an offshoot of the CIA that does like venture capital. And I think Siri, the technology that went into Siri came out of a DARPA fund. It's like all this stuff that people aren't aware of.
Right.
That maybe not the whole thing, but bits and pieces of it that are really critical. The government subsidizes a lot of that stuff.
And that's like the super high end, really competitive stuff. Like DARPA is one of the best run programs, I think, ever. And it's because they are extremely high level, and they have a very, if anybody is interested, I mean, this book, The Entrepreneurial State, is a really good breakdown of the DARPA program and why it works so well. And also the number of behavioral economics books about why DARPA works, the model works. But that's sort of at the high level. More generally, the Small Business Innovation Research Grant program, so SBIR grants. Lots of startups are financed by those, and it's a grant up to $1 million, and then you can get a sole source for forever if you get to SBIR 3. I think
we helped build a DoD cyber website.
Right? Really?
We did it in 40 days. It was a crazy project.
That is awesome. I mean, the government is really good at financing early stage innovation. They're terrible at taking credit for it.
Exactly. I mean, even the Roomba, which my parents have it at home. Yeah. But the Roomba came out of a robot that was used in Afghanistan and Iraq after 9/11 to help detonate IEDs.
Seriously?
And that technology was basically, it came out of, I think, of like a cyber grant. Yeah. And it was used to basically, so part of cyber is that it has to help support the government, but it also has to have a commercial application. It's like 3 phases. The first one is like the concept. Second one is a prototype. The third phase is you have to actually commercialize it. Yep. And so the way they commercialized it was they took it from detonating IEDs to vacuuming houses. So that's an example of going from the federal side of it to the commercial side of it. So,
wow. Yeah. I didn't think we'd cover Roombas in this conversation.
Exactly.
No, I mean, you're totally right. And
I don't have a commission payment. To make the Roombas.
I wouldn't mind if you did. I like the Roomba.
We don't do product placements.
I'm a fan of the Roomba. No, but I mean, to add to that, one of the things that I've seen recently is foundations and government agencies that traditionally did not do any kind of investment in early stage innovation are starting to do that. So I mentioned UNICEF or USAID before. UNICEF has an innovation grant they give out. One of our companies from PeaceTech, Red Crow, actually was awarded that a couple years ago.
Is it Red Crow cybersecurity? Or
no, they do data analytics to basically help refugee populations and people in working in at-risk environments or in risky environments. And I mean, this is not something that's only 1 or 2 organizations or agencies. Lots of organizations are doing this. Oxfam has a venture fund even. Wow, I mean, and it's not venture in the traditional sense for the most part. It's not venture in the traditional sense that people are taking equity, they're taking a piece of the company, they're taking a board seat. It's basically like an innovation award. It's like a grant without all the strings attached. It's like investing in early stage startups. And I find that fascinating, and I think that there's real promise there. And it's something that I think that entrepreneurs, I think, get caught up in the sort of venture rat race, and they are convinced that if they're not pitching, 9 or 10 VCs in a week, that they're failing or that they're never going to raise capital.
They see money as the end and not as the means, basically. They're judging their success not necessarily by customers and stuff like that. Okay, it's almost like status validation. It feels like, where it's like, oh, keeping up with the Joneses, this company got a VC round, and we should be doing the same thing. But there's a lot more opportunity out there than just going that route.
I think so, and you don't have to give up part of your company to do it. I mean, you can finance a lot on non-dilutive capital, and I think that it's just, I mean, the validation is there, and at the end of the day, who really cares if you raise $5 million from a prominent VC if you can build $100 million company without it? I mean, I'd rather take the $100 million company and have a bigger equity position personally. Right.
I also think the other benefit of bootstrapping initially, at least, is that it forces you to become highly efficient at running a business. Whereas I think sometimes if you get too much money too early on, all of these things where resource management, how you hire people, you have to be very not only product innovative but also process innovative. You're really thinking about how do I attract the best talent? We need to have money. How do you do that, right? And so there's part of it's storytelling, part of it's vision. So when you exercise those constraints on your company, those pressures actually like really, I think, drive an efficient organization that can be built to scale. Where sometimes I've seen organizations where they get funding too early on and they just like spend all this money on tech and they're like, the organization becomes very lopsided. Yep. So when they try to scale, they don't have like an HR person. And like you mentioned, like you said, the humanities, and not just the tech part of it, but also just sort of like the social intelligence that goes into running a business. It's not just about making the technology and the product amazing. What happens in that scenario is you tend to over-engineer things and you build features that the customer doesn't even need, and then you've burned all this money and that's it, like you're done. So
yeah, that's a really good point, because like what you're saying about the pressures of being cash strapped, making you sort of more nimble, more
there's a balanced approach, because you don't want to be too cash strapped. Well, it's just like you can't grow then.
Right. So. Yeah. You don't want your family walking away from you, kicking you out of the house.
Exactly.
No, I mean, but it's something that I like to look at the high profile failures in venture. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, you're familiar with Juicero, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so like Juicero's that's kind of like, the dead horse that's been, beaten by everybody at this point. But like, I think it's important to remember that like,
just recap. Yeah, Juicero is the company that built this whole thing where they're going to like disrupt.
It was cold pressed juice for the home.
Yeah.
I think. And it was like it was gonna disrupt like the juice industry.
And you got like this packet and you would put it in a machine and it would do all this stuff.
The machine costs like $400. It would, run this complicated, sort of process where it would squeeze the packet out and mix it with water. And then you had like some ready-made juice. And somebody put a video on YouTube very early after this was launched to like much fanfare. And the video was just like somebody cutting open the tab and then just kind of going like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And it worked without.
And it worked great, and it was cheaper, right?
It was because the machine was like $400. And they were financed by, I don't know if it was Kleiner. I forget who financed that.
But it was one of the big VC firms.
It was like $150 million. And like you would have thought that somebody would have maybe tried to validate whether or not there's a need for like $150 million juice maker.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean that's not the only example. There's dozens of
Segway. There's like a whole bunch of other ones.
I mean, it's not perfect. I mean, like venture does get things wrong. I mean, and I think the reality is just that it is a fantastic. I mean, and I say this working for a venture capital firm. I mean, like there are things that the VCs do extremely well, and a lot of the high growth tech companies have been enabled by VC. I would never say that they weren't. I just think there's kind of a mismatch of expectations often between entrepreneurs who are pitching them and entrepreneurs who think they've got their product market fit when they don't. I just think it's better to burn some of that sweat equity up front in trying to figure out whether or not there's a real problem that you're solving, and figure that out quick, and then find who your customers are. And as much as you can do that without taking outside capital, the better. And at a certain point, you likely will need an injection of cash in order to scale, because it's really hard. It's hard to grow a company organically, especially a tech company. You're competing for talent, you're competing for resources, you're competing for getting the market first.
And it's hard to get traditional financing. If you want to, like even other businesses like a restaurant, they will get a loan from a bank because of the fact that they have collateral. If you have collateral, right, you can get the machinery, you can get the real estate. With software, you don't really get that much.
No, and you have like 4 people with an idea.
You got 3 laptops that are depreciating in value. We don't have office space. We're using like a co-working space. And so that's what the banks can ask you, like, what assets do you have? What real estate do you guys have? Like what, and then IP for them is like, like they don't want to touch that, because for them if it's a proven model and successful, that's a different case. You have banks like Silicon Valley Bank, which are kind of revolution. They're shifting sort of how banks are thinking about financing startups. But if you're in the software industry, it's really hard to get it. So that's why VC is the primary way that most startups go that route.
Yeah, I like Silicon Valley Bank. I mean, and I think there are innovative ways of financing startups. But I was talking to a VC friend of mine the other day, and an entrepreneur asked him that. He said, "Why not just get a bank loan?" And he said, "Do you have any collateral? Because I would take the bank loan if I had collateral. Like if I were you, I would take the bank loan.
And if you're a young
your
startup,
interest rate's like what 10% maybe. That's a lot less than 100x the VC would be expecting.
And if you're young and you're like in your 20s and you're trying to run a business, you don't own real estate. So it's usually like your parents are going to have to co-sign it or something like that. So the economic incentives are all very different. There are all sorts of constraints with it. And maybe the best approach is a mixed model. Like for if you have a lot of credit, you're going to obviously get a bank to kind of finance that, but they're going to look at your existing accounts and making sure that you have an accounts receivable of some sort. These are all accounting terms, but we can kind of go from there. So we talked about Peace Tech, we talked about the program, we talked about the companies, we talked about financing. What are some of the trends in DC? We're obviously focused on what happens in DC, but you have a very unique perspective. You see a global, view. What does it look like? You mentioned companies in Africa, you mentioned Latin America, you mentioned Europe, you mentioned Asia. What are you seeing in terms of trends when it comes to startups?
Yeah, and that is actually one of the more amazing things about the space, specifically the impact space, is that it feels like it's a much more global sort of space. I can't really describe it very well, but I mean,
you feel like you're changing the world just by walking. I mean, like that's how I felt.
Yeah.
I was like, because over here, like we're selling widgets at the end of the day. Like you're building a website to sell widgets, and I'm not trying to say anything. It's great. But when you walk into like Peace Tech Accelerator, like you feel like a superhero. Like you're part of this like movement of people that are trying to change the world, and you're just like, then I go home and I'm like, oh man, what am I doing with my life?
Well,
so
I do too. One of the things I've learned is that, there are differences and then there are striking similarities between people operating in different regions of the world. And I think there are common threads like, fast growth, get venture capital, get lots of customer traction. Like, startups the world over think like that. I mean, there seems to me like a kind of a universal mindset as far as that. One of the things that I found actually working with startups from the continent, so far we've worked with companies from Ghana and from Nigeria. Ghana and Nigeria. And what I've learned is that they just, I don't know what it is, they hustle harder. I mean, they build before they raise money, and they are working like 3 or 4 jobs to finance their venture. And a lot of the companies that we work with, they build a software product, but they also do like developer training on the side. So like Devless that you mentioned, like they built a platform that is ready to go, and they have customers, but they needed to generate more customer revenue. So they started doing training boot camps to get people aware of the platform. And then out of that, they got some consulting gigs. And so they were like,
they just launched like multiple revenue streams.
Yeah. That's great. Like another one of our companies, Covenworks, they basically, so you're familiar with like Andela, like they basically do sort of like offshore, like tech team augmentation. So Covenworks does this, but they do it with using, they're basically training kids, so like training people who are mostly from post-conflict regions, but they're training people on developer skills. So like for the high level like AI, ML, like the really in-demand stuff, the data scientists, they're training people in Nigeria, and now they're expanding to other countries in Africa, and then they're connecting them with jobs, and they're helping manage the projects that they have. Because one of the pitfalls of being a labor broker is that if the quality of the labor is low, if you don't have any way of sort of controlling for that or managing the project, it becomes kind of challenging getting repeat customers. But anyway, this is funny because I was talking to a partner at Echo VC, which is a fund that invests in Africa-focused startups at an event I was at recently. And I was telling him this. I was like, what is it about startups on the continent that they just seem to have so much more built when they sort of walk into a room to get like an angel investment? They don't go out for capital until they have something. And he said that it's just there's a mindset that like, you have to come correct. You have to come with something built, and you have to have validation. And it's a very competitive environment to be operating in. And so that's probably part of it. But one of the things that we were talking about was how entrepreneurs there seem to be, they have to solve like 4 or 5 levels of problem. So like, Covenworks as an example, they originally started out as being a labor broker. But what they found was that there is a choke point in the labor market there. There aren't enough developers who have, the high skill, in-demand, or the in-demand skills that they need to fill like high-tech positions that companies are looking to offshore. So they had to create a pool of talent to do that. And so now they're kind of both, but
that's incredible. So they're building the ecosystem the startup exists within, basically.
Exactly.
That's phenomenal.
And like that to me is just, it's like one massive, possibly unsolvable challenge is one thing, but 2, I mean, it's so impressive. And, and I think that, bringing all those companies together, from around the world, with some of the fantastic startups that we work with, they're based in the region, like in DC or Maryland or Virginia. What's amazing is they all share the same kind of, they have the same kind of drive, same kind of passion for what they do. They're all, motivated by sort of their core mission. And for us, they're motivated by a dual mission. It's the success of the company, but then it's the solution to the social problem that they're trying to find. And I think that's the more interesting piece of this is like, finding ways to unite solving a social and a business problem and finding a way to do that that's sustainable. It's extremely challenging. It's literally twice as hard as doing one or the other, maybe even more so. Just to tell like a little story. Do we have time for a little story?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So this little story was like, I was at a conference the other week in New York. It was the MIT Solve competition. And again, MIT Solve is a source of non-dilutive capital. It's I think it's a $10,000 prize, and you get access to MIT's network, and it's like basically a year of mentorship and access to resources. And it's just a prize. You just have to apply for it. Anyway, so I was up there. So just a plug for MIT. So I don't serve on their board. I'm not an advisor. So
we'll have the MIT like logo.
There's the logo, like screen crawler. So I was up at this conference, and I was seeing these impact entrepreneurs pitch, and they're also talking about the social problems that they're solving for. And they're solving for like a specific, part of, one is like, one example is like a company called Moringa School. And they're basically training developers I think they're in Accra right now. And I think they're expanding. I think they're in Kenya. Anyway, it's a developer school. They're training up developers, get them get them skilled so they can get into, high-tech jobs. And it was a very specific segment of the population. And the questions they were getting asked were sort of like, well, so sure, you're helping, these people in Kenya, but what about people in other countries? And also, what about the people who are going to be displaced by those tech jobs? Like, how are you helping people who are being displaced? And very relevant question, very, very valid question, certainly sort of in the big picture. But I was kind of sitting there and I was thinking, I used to see B2B SaaS tech companies pitch me at CIT GAP. And I'd be in the room, and this company's pitching me on a solution they've developed for like a marketing department to help drive 50% more traffic to marketing. And if I'd been in that room, and like it would sort of be the equivalent would be somebody sitting there saying, well, that's all well and good for the marketing guys, but on the sales side over here, they're getting nothing out of the solution. What are you doing for them? And it's like the opposite of what we normally coach startups on, which is like refine, pinpoint your customer and go after them, and then expand outward. Like,
we have a saying that there's ridges and niches. And so just like really focusing on a customer segment. Exactly. And really like going up a vertical is usually the way that we kind of operate, but it sounds like it's a very different experience. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the way to do it. And I think that impact entrepreneurs often get sort of saddled with this kind of like, well, how are you helping the rest of the world's population? And like, I think this is one of the things that I'm personally on a mission to try and demystify, because it's like, you can solve a very specific social problem. Like, sure, there are, other problems in the ecosystem, but like, this is a startup we're talking about. This is not a government. This is not an NGO with a multi-billion-dollar budget. This is a startup that has maybe $75 in the bank, and they're trying to solve a customer problem.
I think it's kind of almost like they're creating their own supply chain almost, like, and I guess that's like the retail version of this, where it's like there's all these other players in this ecosystem, and they're creating the system for all of them to kind of operate within. So it's the impact level is not just in that specific market, but it can be across multiple parts of their society, which is that's just incredible to see that sort of happen. I think we're gonna have one more question, and that is, I'm gonna take it back to the beginning, which is about the accelerator. So you've run it sounds like 4 accelerators at this point. What are some of your tips? What are some of your tips for accelerator programs? Because a lot of people across the country are looking into accelerator programs, and because you have so much experience in that space, like what is maybe like one of your top tip for doing that?
To people running accelerators, or
for people that are looking to start accelerators,
looking to start accelerators, as in like entrepreneurs, or like people who are looking to launch accelerators. People
that are sort of the management side of it.
Gotcha.
Because the entrepreneurs, I think, there's a lot of accelerators and incubators that are out there, but if you're running an accelerator, like how do I know that this accelerator is run really well? And I know like MACH37 is recognized, I think, nationally. For the companies that are coming out, and obviously these other accelerators as well. But like, even though it's like a Virginia accelerator, like it's gotten national coverage. So there's so many cybersecurity businesses in Virginia. It's, I think, the cybersecurity capital, I think, of the country at this point. A large part due to the federal government.
The marketing plan worked.
Yeah, exactly. It's good. So what are some of your tips? Like if you're managing an accelerator, like what are some of the ways that you felt were for making the program successful?
I mean, yeah, that's a great question. It's a big question. I mean, so first of all, nothing is perfect. And if there's one thing I've learned, so much of success comes down to being able to pivot just like your startups do. So I started working for some fantastic people, working with the founding team at MACH37 and learning from them. They developed a fantastic program, and it's a model, I think, for accelerators. The thing that I learned, though, working across different programs was everything I thought about everything I thought that I knew when I'd start a new cohort, got sort of crashed to pieces within the first week. And we've since gotten better at this, but the thing that I thought I could do was sort of build a calendar of very well-to-do, successful people, and I'd bring them in one after the other, and they would sort of talk about what their successes were, what their failures were, and how to ensure success for your startup. And what I found working in programs that sort of had a model like that, and then also just observing other accelerators and visiting accelerators in not just around the country but around the world, what struck me is that I think doesn't work anymore. I think it did work
because it's not a one size fits all. I think that's if you're able to solve a problem in one market, it doesn't mean you can do it. It doesn't necessarily apply in other markets, right?
Right. I mean, the thing that we do at Peace Tech that it takes a lot of effort. It is the hardest part of our jobs. But the thing that we do is we make it as bespoke a program as possible. And we do that by connecting our entrepreneurs with mentors who can directly give them feedback on whatever aspect it is of what they're doing. So so we brought in roundtables and small group workshops of entrepreneurs such as yourself. You'll be in a couple of weeks for one of these. And we do small group workshops, and it's really hands-on. It's like, if you have, you can do sort of a general session on go-to-market strategy, but how does that apply to my specific business?
If it's B2B is fundamentally different from B2C, it's different from B2G.
Well, and if it's B2B for financial
exactly,
institutions, it's different from B2B for healthcare institutions.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
that's great. So the thing that I think that it sounds like you teach these universals that you kind of hear a lot of accelerators, which is like customer discovery, building out a prototype, MVP, testing the market, but you're also giving them very customized one-on-one mentorship.
Yeah. And so it's a mix of both. I mean, there is a lot of general content, quote unquote, that I think as a startup, as an entrepreneur, you have to know. You absolutely have to know what a good term sheet looks like. You have to know what a bad term sheet looks like, and you have to know how to negotiate a term sheet. And your skills in negotiating aside, you have to know what good and bad looks like. You have to know how to measure progress. You have to know how to run a software sprint. You have to understand basic things. And a lot of entrepreneurs come in the door having an understanding of some of those things, but not all of them. And that is why we do a bespoke program, because for the entrepreneur who has raised capital before, I'm not terribly concerned about, coaching them on, okay, here's what a good term sheet, bad term sheet looks like. What I'm more concerned about is, okay, you have not done the customer discovery, the level of customer discovery you need to validate or invalidate your assumptions. So let's work on that.
Yeah, that's great, because it also depends on the team. Like some teams are really tech strong and they need somebody who can help them out with sales. Other teams are just like the founders of sales, great at sales, but they don't really have the technological sort of acumen that they need to build a product.
Right.
So that's really good that you guys are doing that level of customization.
And this is not at all unique to us. I mean, I learn from the best, and I mean, I'm constantly doing my own customer discovery to figure out, how I can be helping our entrepreneurs better. And so we do that with feedback with our entrepreneurs. We ask them what's working, what's not. But I also ask, experts, and I go out to other accelerators and I try to see what is working for them and what could be working for us. I mean, one of the it's not really an accelerator, but one of the models locally that I sort of point to a lot is a company called Data Tribe. And they, familiar with Data Tribe? Yeah. So, I mean, for those of you who are not familiar, Data Tribe will do sort of a Series A level investment, or like a significant Series C. They'll fill a round, but then following that, they provide intensive mentorship and really like business building, staff augmentation, and they really help get you from, the point where you have an MVP into the hands of their cybersecurity accelerator or cybersecurity company, so into the hands of like 60 CISOs who are using the product, and they help companies get to hundreds of millions in
Chief
revenue.
Information Security Officer.
Yes, Chief Information Security Officer. And so, but they work with maybe 7 or 8 companies. It's extremely narrowly focused, and it's a model that can work, and it's something that I think is worth looking at. I mean, there are other models that work really well. I mean, Techstars has a really good track record. I mean, they have graduated some fantastic companies. I think the challenge for us specifically is that we're teaching our companies not only best practices in business and how to build their marketing campaigns, how to build a sales strategy, but we're also trying to help them figure out how do they message their impact, how do they ensure that they're having an impact, how do they measure the impact they're having,
which is a very important question.
It is, and it's something that it's not just important for them to know for the purposes of running their company and being good corporate stewards and of their mission. But it's specifically important if they're pitching an impact fund, which cares about those metrics. Like they care how you're tracking your impact, what your KPIs are for impact, how you define impact. And some funds are much more rigorous about that than others. So it's something that they need to know anyway. But I mean, at the end of the day, we can't take credit for their success. I mean, we're recruiting some spectacularly qualified, talented innovators from all over the world, and we're helping them figure out how to get their pitch right, how to refine their business model, how to improve their go-to-market strategy, and we're giving them mentorship, we're getting them access to a network, we're providing a capital injection, we're doing all those things. But at the end of the day, we're also picking people who are they're just head and shoulders like like they're above I mean, they're innovators.
Yeah,
and it's something that is really, the most fascinating part of my job, or the most interesting part of my job, is being able to work with such talented and driven people. I mean, it really is like a thrill to work with them. And it's humbling. I mean, they come to our program, they trust their businesses with us, and we take that really seriously.
That's great. So I think we'll go ahead and start wrapping up. So this is an amazing program. I think it's really unique. It's one of its kind.
Thank you.
And like I mentioned, I think it's one of the hidden gems here in DC. And I remember going there.
Hopefully hidden no longer.
Hidden no longer. Now we're gonna hopefully put you guys on the map. But I think just every part of it is so intentional. Like I love the fact that you've got the Peace Tech brand onto it, so you're getting that global reach. And then you've got AWS. But for us, to be honest, one of our most expensive things that we look at is how do we cut back our cloud computing costs. And so when I first heard about it, I was like, how does Fifth Tribe get access to those AWS credits? And then C5 Capital or Accelerate, which actually helps out with the funds and everything. So you've got the global network, you've got this great knowledge network, you've got this cloud computing, you've got the capital part of it. It's a great mix. And the companies you're attracting are awesome. So when does the next cohort start? When do the applications due? What's the application process like?
Sure, I'll go into that. But first, I just want to say that the only reason this is possible is because of people like you. So Karam is one of our oldest mentors. I mean, you started at the first cohort.
I think so, yeah.
And our program literally could not function without our mentor network. It is the reason we're better, I think, than anybody else. Is because we have the best mentors. And so credit to you and all the mentors that we work with who give up their time to come in and work with our startups. And I truly appreciate it. So as far as the application process, it's relatively straightforward. So we have an application through F-Success portal. Excuse me. So F-Success is where we manage all of our applications, and it's where we do direct intake with companies, so companies can apply directly through F-Success. We also like referrals from our network. So for anybody who is interested in the accelerator, or thinks they might know of a company that would be interested, or that might fit the sort of impact mission that we have, I would always love to talk to any startup that is looking to do what we're doing, or looking to work with us in some way. I would always love a referral. So I mean, as far as the way the program works, it's an 8-week program. We do 3 cohorts a year, so our next cohort starts in February, and we work on site in DC at U.S. Institute of Peace. And as part of the program, we do public-facing events. So we do events at local co-working spaces, pitch events. We do roundtables, networking events. happy hours, basically designed to give everybody exposure, to give them some visibility in our network. In addition to that, we provide our companies following the program with basically advice, support for companies that are trying to raise subsequent rounds of capital. We support that to the extent that we can. As investors of the companies in our network, we take as active a role as we can in helping ensure that the company is successful. So, companies continue to draw on us for advice, for networking opportunities, for visibility, and to help them with subsequent capital raises. So that's basically how it works.
So this cohort is going to have a demo day at the end of the program.
That's right.
So when is that?
First week of November.
First week of November, and then the next cohort starts in February. When do the applications go live for that?
So applications are open now. So we actually do
go right now.
Yeah, we do rolling applications. So because we run 3 a year, we're sort of always kind of looking at companies that might be interested.
So as soon as you're done listening to this, what's the website?
So it's F6S, www.f6s.com, and it's the Peace Tech Accelerator. So if you just type Peace Tech Accelerator into F6S or / Peace Tech Accelerator, it'll take you to our application.
So go to the website, submit an application.
You can also submit an inquiry through c5us.com. So that's our accelerator website.
Great. Yeah. So it's a great program. I think I personally learned a lot. Thank you so much for participating in our second episode and really helping us showcase some of the awesome talent that's here in the DC metropolitan area. That's all we have for tonight. Thank you, Mike, for coming on board.
Thanks, Graham. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thanks.